Very warm welcome to a lecture in a series on topics in historical linguistics. It's the topic for the paper 4 students on totalitarian language, and it's a topic that is very topical. We are very lucky that we have an excellent speaker for today. Professor Henk de Berg from Sheffield came already 2 years ago to speak about his book, Trump and Hitler, a comparative study in lying, which is going through the rows there. And he has since followed on and is writing currently a book on the rhetoric of the AfD and how it has been inspired or dispirited by references to languages used by other rulers or would-be potentates across history and the world. So we'll do a very quick run, as the first four lectures were on early New High German linguistics. And we are going through the rhetoric from the 14th century now to the 21st century, looking but also at continuities in language use. So I listed here just some of the key dates that mark the development of propaganda and communication across the centuries, and which play a role in the paper 4 lecture series, such as the printing press and printing with movable type, the exploration of cheap paper making, which then enables newspapers, and then radio as a very important means of mass communication, and that had been used then during National Socialism with the Volksempfänger, but also how the media changes have influenced modern ways of communication, up to the role of social media in the newest forms of rhetoric. And I see it's now 2:05, so without further ado, I will hand over to Professor Henk de Berg to lead us through Anatomy of Populism, a critical analysis of the AfD and its rhetoric.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming. And of course, a big thank you to Henrike for inviting me a second time in this lecture series. It's a bit difficult to talk about the AfD for an audience like this, I guess, because some of you may have been watching the German news and following various reports on the AfD in recent years assiduously, and others perhaps less so. So I find it very difficult to pitch this, and I just hope it's not going to be too superficial. If so, then I do apologize. I also always struggle with the time, so I'm not exactly sure where I'm going to end up in this PowerPoint, but I'll do my best. So, founded in 2013, so not all that long ago, the rise of the right-wing extremist or far-right AfD has been meteoric. I'm using the phrase right-wing extremist in the sort of general English sense of the word, not in the specific sense of the German Verfassungsschutz, for example. So within a space of really a little over 10 years, the AfD has gone from a marginal protest party to a serious challenger to the established order. You will have seen this, I'm sure. So the CDU-CSU and the AfD are the only two parties in the recent elections, which took place on Sunday, to have numbers in the 20s, and the SPD, Grüne, and so on are sort of all pretty far behind. Now, Germany has had far-right parties before, since 1945. I'll just mention two of them. Here we see the NPD, the Nationaldemokratische Partei Deutschlands, which had some regional successes in the late 1960s in particular. The party still exists. It was renamed Die Heimat in 2023, and here we see two of their relatively recent election posters. I draw your attention particularly to the one here on the left that the AfD reused, as we will see later on, in a slightly different format. And then another party which generated quite a lot of national discussion in the 1980s, but didn't actually get all that much support. That's Die Republikaner, led by this rather unpleasant man, Franz Schönhuber. But it's really only with the AfD that we see a genuinely successful far-right party in the Federal Republic. So why did that happen? What kind of people vote for the AfD? What is their platform? And above all, what is the rhetoric that they use? Here, by the way, we see two posters by the Republikaner. They also still exist, but are completely irrelevant. So, very short overview of the AfD, something that most of you, or some of you, will be familiar with. As I said earlier, founded in 2013, really as a centre-right Eurosceptic party, as a Alternative, an alternative to the conservative Christian Democrats led by Angela Merkel, who had famously described her pro-European policies as Alternativlos. So against the backdrop of the Eurozone crisis and the massive EU IMF bailouts of countries like Greece, the AfD advocated a retransfer of powers from the European Union to the nation state, as well as a reintroduction of the Deutschmark. Now, some of its members had ethno-nationalist sympathies, and right from the start there was a bit of entryism, so genuinely far-right people trying to get into the party, or getting into the party and move it in a much more extreme direction. There's some really good documentaries on that you can watch on YouTube. But on the whole, the party's platform was not implicitly or explicitly xenophobic in 2013. That changed with what is often called the migrant crisis of 2015. So following the influx of over 1 million asylum seekers into Germany, mostly refugees from the wars in Syria, Afghanistan, and Iraq, but also a smaller number of economic migrants from the Balkan countries, into Germany, the party veered to the extreme right. So against Merkel's famous slogan-like promise, "Wir schaffen das," the AfD proposed a near-complete immigration stop. And against earlier statements by leading Christian Democratic politicians that der Islam gehört zu Deutschland, the party insisted on the incompatibility of the Muslim faith with the country's Christian heritage. Its economic nationalism turned into ethnic and cultural nationalism, and the main addressees of its increasingly nativist and populist message were no longer the educated middle classes, but the broad masses. The party also joined the ongoing culture war, opposing affirmative action, stressing the traditional binary view of man and women, and rejecting the use of gender-neutral language. And this increasing radicalization is apparent from a repeated change of leadership, which each of the leaders being more extreme than the previous one. So here we go from Bernd Lucke, the founder, professor of economics at Hamburg, to Frauke Petri, to Jörg Meuthen, and then to the current co-leaders today, Alice Weide and Tino Kruppalla, whom we have here. So the AfD is what's often called a container ideology. So it has a number of different and often arguably inconsistent messages within it based on what I like to call against-isms. So here we are. And you can see how some of this is really contradictory. As I always say to my own students, I should stand in front of this thing because it's recording me. As I always say to my own students, Henrike will make this accessible to all of you, so you don't have to, feel free to write everything down, but you're probably not going to be able to keep up. So no need to write everything down. Neoliberalism, a socialism of sorts, nationalism, that against financial capitalism and big business has probably been toned down a little bit, possibly to do with Elon Musk's support for the party. Social conservatism, xenophobia, Politikverdrossenheit, and conspiracism. So I did this book on Trump and Hitler, and one of the things a comparative study in lying, right? I'm not saying they're the same. One of the things I say about National Socialism, and of course others have said this as well, the National Socialism was also a container ideology, which you can already see from the name, right? Nationalism, socialism, normally seen as opposites. Famous phrase of the Communist Manifesto, final phrase, workers of all countries unite, is internationalist, and nationalism is obviously focused on the nation state. So the advantage of that, the advantage of being a container ideology, is that you can sort of hoover up many more potential voters than is the case with more traditional parties. But it also tends to lead to all sorts of internecine struggle. In other words, Flügelkämpfe. That was the case in the Nazi Party. Although Hitler very early on, as of course you know, 1934, got rid of the so-called left wing, relatively speaking, of the NSDAP. It's also the case with the AfD. So, what are the reasons behind the rise of the Alternative für Deutschland? They're really the same, I think, or very similar at least, to the reasons, the drivers behind the rise of populism in Holland, Italy, the United States, and so on. So we have globalization and automation. So jobs that were once secure are now being carried out by machines or by artificial intelligence, or else they have been outsourced to low-wage countries. Both traditional institutions and the individual nation states seem incapable of dealing with this economic challenge, which has led to a disenchantment with supranational international bodies like the European Union, but it has also led to a criticism of the of national elites, of the establishment as a swamp of self-serving globalists. And then over the last 1 or 2 decades, we've seen an increasing awareness of the wrongs of racism, homophobia, misogyny, and so on. And movements such as Me Too and Black Lives Matter have tried to redress that balance. But all of that has also generated a backlash on the part of more traditional-minded or more prejudiced people who view all of that as political correctness and wokeism. And all of that is then made a lot worse by the fear of immigration as a threat, a perceived threat to the country's own norms and values. But I think it's more than that. I think just focusing on that set of factors is too simple. Because with its, to just take one example, with its declining birth rate and rapidly aging population, Germany needs more workers, right? So having less immigration would actually be bad for the German economy. And yet quite a few voters still vote, quite a few people still vote AfD, including, by the way, many unemployed people. So I think, just like with Trumpism, the real reason so many Germans are attracted to the AfD is those people's deep sense of alienation. So in a world in which all that is solid seems to be melting into air, people feel that everything they hold dear, everything they knew, all their old traditions, all of that is disappearing. They feel they no longer have any terra firma under their feet. More than that, they feel forgotten, looked down on, neglected. They feel that traditional politicians, the establishment, isn't listening to them. So I think that what really resonates with so many people is the party's deeper message, as it were. Its deeper message and promise: we are there for you. We are the only party who really care. And we are the only ones who are not held back by the establishment's proclivity for cowardly compromise and political correctness. We will really do something for you. So I think the scholar of linguistics and cognitive scientist George Lakoff is right. He wrote a rather good book, short book, called Don't Think of an Elephant, which I can heartily recommend to you, after my own book, of course. That's just a joke. So Lakoff famously says, people don't vote their wallet, they vote their values. So the idea that what moves people politically, that's bread and butter issues, that, as Bill Clinton's chief political strategist in the 90s famously said, it's the economy, stupid. I think that's a myth. What ultimately drives political change is a longing for self-worth, a desire for respect. And that is what is, I got rid of it now, but that is what is really behind all of this. So let's talk just for a little bit about what is supposed to be the topic of my lecture, which is the AfD's rhetorical strategies. And again, I think the rhetorical strategies that the AfD uses are very similar to or identical to the rhetorical strategies used by populist parties all across the world, including in America, same what Trump is doing. So there's the use of emotive language. Still, I want to walk around. Next time I want to have a camera on me so I can walk around. Anyway, I'm just joking. So emotive language. That was just to keep you awake to talk. Anyway, so Gustave Le Bon, I'm sure you've heard the name before, in 1895 wrote a very famous book called Psychologie des Foules, Mass Psychology. The English translation is called The Crowd, a book which was very influential on Hitler, by the way. And in 1913, he published another book called Aphorisme du temps présent, in which he famously said, on domine plus facilement les peuples en excitant leur passion qu'en s'occupant de leurs intérêts. It's much easier to dominate people by playing to their emotions than by actually addressing their interests. There's the archetypal structure of the political message. So we, the AfD, are the good guys fighting the bad guys. A story of outsiders fighting a corrupt establishment. The construction of a spurious us versus an equally spurious them. So the us as against, first of all, foreigners, immigrants, Muslims, and so on. That's not really das Volk. But also the construction of an us, das Volk, as against these liberal judges, the mainstream media, so the word that the Nazis used, die Lügenpresse. It's a word that existed before the Nazis came to power, but it was very popular among the Nazis. And now that word is still being used, or again being used, in right-wing circles. So it's also us against the system, us against the mainstream media, us against these liberal journalists, and so on. Then there's the use of personal insults. Which, first of all, tends to draw attention to what you're saying, and second, also decomplexifies the world, right? Because it makes the problems look like the problems of individual people rather than of complex social structures. Conspiracism and the construction of a parallel reality, helped along, of course, by information bubbles and certain influencers, podcasters, social media, and so on. Permanent electioneering, the business of outrage. Right? Trump is very good at this, so even though he's in power, he's still in many ways, yes, he's doing lots of stuff, but he's also still talking about Biden and Kamala Harris and so on. And then dog whistling, we'll look at some examples later on. The two rhetorical strategies that I want to spend a little more time on, I talked about these 2 years ago, but they are important because I think that because of these two things, first of all, exaggeration, exaggerated statements, people tend to take populist parties less seriously than they should, or else they view its electorate as significantly more extremist than it really is. But when it comes to these extremist statements, I think many AfD voters don't actually take them literally. They take them seriously, but not literally. To them, to these voters, the AfD is authentic because its representatives talk like us. Right? Because when we are with our family and friends, we exaggerate all the time. Right? We say things, this new watch that I bought, best decision of my life. Now, one would hope that that isn't really the case, right? Or we say, I'm working as a barista, and you know, my new boss, he's worse than Stalin, this guy. Now, again, that is unlikely to be the case, but that's how we really, when we are among family and friends, that's the way we speak, right? And that sets the AfD apart from their so-called smooth-talking, politically correct opponents. So the AfD communicates in what the Italian political scientist has called the language of the home, the language that we use when we are together with our family and friends, and that makes them come across as authentic. So the AfD's bewusst inszenierte Tabubrüche, the deliberately staged breaking of taboos, works in a very similar way. So taboo breaking, I'll give some examples in a moment, especially when it comes to the Holocaust, but also when it comes to such issues as religious toleration. These taboo, or the breaking of these taboos, acts above all as a reminder of the country's supposedly backward-looking, politically correct, oppressive public sphere. Right? This is the thing that one of the things that Elon Musk said when he, at his virtual appearance at an AfD rally, let's look to the future, Germany is way too obsessed with the past, and so on. And a lot of AfD voters, sadly, feel the same way. So, Tabubrüche, here's the most famous one. Hitler und die Nazis sind nur ein Vogelschiss in über 1000 Jahren erfolgreicher deutscher Geschichte. When Olaf Scholz quoted this in one of the debates, he said Fliegenschiss. Probably doesn't make all that much difference. Well, he said that's what the AfD had said. Of course, this is a statement, you will have seen this, that is crying out for deconstruction, right? Because Alexander Gauland is on the one hand saying the Nazi period, not that important, doesn't play a role anymore today, and on the other hand, he's talking about the 1,000-year Reich, even though Germany was founded only in 1871. And this is the other one, Alice Weide. Berg has headscarf girls, knife-wielding men on welfare, and other ne'er-do-wells. So on the one hand, quite an embarrassing, shameful, wrong, morally wrong statement. But again, I think rather than buying into these statements wholesale, many AfD voters view them as timely kicks in the teeth of what they see as an oversensitive, stifling, debating atmosphere. Do I have to until 5 too? Good. Right, so I want to investigate the AfD's rhetoric a bit more by looking at some of their election posters. I'll go a few years back, because the election posters that the AfD has today are rather vanilla, rather boring and uninteresting. I don't know whether you do trigger warnings in Oxford. If you do, I will show 2 election posters with scantily clad women If you don't want to see scantily clad women, feel free to leave now. Okay, so the first one is still okay. Oh, I was going to say, these are not the scantily clad women, though in the 1970s someone might have said almost as interesting. I talked about these rhetorical strategies, and I do so quite extensively in chapter 7 of this book as well, available for only $24.99. Anyway, that's enough self-advertisement for one day. Okay, so two election posters from 2017, one from 2021, and then again two from 2017. So the first one again is this one. Berg, I prefer Burgundy wine. And below that, the AfD's election slogan in 2017, have faith in yourself, Germany. So the burqa is used here to symbolize female oppression and general intolerance, and is contrasted with wine drinking, joie de vivre, and openness. And of course, most Muslims don't drink. The women, of course, are all fair-skinned, and they wear the kind of clothing that is often seen as typically German, Austrian, Bavarian, typically German, and that as clothing that, as a rule, has a low neckline, which contrasts with the burqa. The personal pronoun ich stehe mir auf Burgunder, is of course not an individual I, but the voice of the whole group. So the we, and this we stands for Germany as a whole. So what this poster is trying to do is create a contrast between two cultures. One that is Islamic, foreign, and repressive, and one that is German, open, and free. And we see the same one in the next poster. That's this one. You can see that the implicit wir of the previous poster has now become an explicit wir. And again, we see the same propaganda trick being performed. Thank you. We have again a contrast between two supposedly homogeneous cultures, and again the poster does not distinguish between culture, nature, and religion. Right? Burqa, Islam, foreign culture are all merged into one. And this supposedly homogeneous other is then contrasted with Germany. Now, the poster is also highly sexualized, of course, sexist. And that's a propaganda trick that I want to explore a little bit more by looking at the next poster. It's this one. So this is a particularly problematic poster. It's sexist propaganda, and indeed sexism as propaganda. So the two reasons why the AfD engages in this kind of sexism, or engaged in this kind of sexism in 2021. First of all, in 2021, the party was not yet as well known and strong as it is today. So when you're an up-and-coming party, what you want to do is you want to attract attention to yourself. And the best way to attract attention is by generating controversy. And second, empirical research has shown that the majority of AfD voters, just like the majority of Trump voters, by the way, or voters of all populist parties across Europe, the majority are men. And women who vote AfD are apparently, on the whole, not particularly bothered by such clearly sexist images. Now, in terms of the language, the bit in the red box there is the one that's key. Deutsche Frau kein Freiwild, kapiert. German woman not fair game, capiche. So what strikes one about this text is, of course, the missing article and the missing verb, right? You would have expected something like die deutsche Frau ist kein Freiwild. Without the article and without the verb, this is my interpretation anyway, the slogan sounds a bit like the kind of reduced basic German that a racist native speaker might use vis-a-vis a foreigner. So I think an approximate English translation would be something like, you know, touch German woman. So it's not just the visuals that are quite offensive, but also the text. And again, this is a picture that is crying out for deconstruction, right? Because on the one hand, the poster is saying women are not sexual objects, but on the other hand, by depicting her in this way, the poster is saying the very opposite, women are sexual objects. Okay, so these are sort of posters that are trying to sell the AfD in a kind of positive sense, as it were. And now we have two negative ones as well. In Seenot eher die nächste Verbrechenswelle, 52% mehr Einwandererkriminalität in 2017. So we can see that the AfD, for all its love of Germany and the German language, is not able to write correct German in 2017. And of course the figure there, the Einwandererkriminalität, is completely made up. So the first thing that strikes one about this poster is, of course, that these people don't seem to be in any distress at all. There's no sense that these immigrants are taking any real risk, and no sense that they might be fleeing a life-threatening situation. And also, we don't see any individual faces, and of course, it's much harder to relate to people whom you don't know and whose faces you don't see. So the immigrants here in this sort of almost idyllic-looking picture, what with the sun and the colors and so on, these people are predicted as portrayed as one anonymous mass. And then finally this one. Again, a picture that seeks to merge Islam, oppression, foreign culture, un-German, and so on into one. The incompatibility, the presumed incompatibility of Islam and Germany is highlighted by the fact that both Islam and nicht are capitalized. And then the bit there at the top, alles für unsere Heimat, is, I would argue, a double dog whistle. So on the one hand, so everything for our homeland, on the one hand, it evokes the now banned slogan of the Nazi stormtroopers, alles für Deutschland. In 2021, Björn Höcke, easily the most controversial AfD politician, someone whom German comedians often refer to as a kind of running gag as Bernd Höcke. Anyway, at a campaign event in Saxony-Anhalt in 2021, Björn Höcke said, alles für unsere Heimat, alles für Sachsen-Anhalt, alles für Deutschland. And of course, alles für Deutschland banned because of its use by the Nazi stormtroopers. So this earned Björn Höcke a €13,000 fine. And now we have the same right, alles für unsere Heimat. It doesn't literally use the SA slogan, but it clearly evokes it. And I think at the same time, this is the other dog whistle, these words are printed against the backdrop of the German flag. So it seems to me that they also evoke the first verse of the German national anthem, Deutschland, Deutschland über alles, which is now likewise banned because of its use by the Nazis, because, of course, as you know, today only the third verse is sung, Einigkeit und Recht und Freiheit für das deutsche Vaterland. And here we have the rather unpleasant Björn Höcke. So we shouldn't fall into the trap of being cliched, though. For all the AfD's xenophobia and social conservatism, the widespread idea that the party's electorate consists largely of economically disadvantaged and uneducated, racist, blue-collar workers, I think is a liberal prejudice. In fact, with one exception, to which I might have time to come back to or to address, with one exception, the voters are defined, I think, less by demography than by psychology. Their defining characteristic, as I said earlier, is a shared sense of voicelessness. We can talk about, if there's time, why that is the reason that most people in East Germany vote for the AfD and fewer people in West Germany, although there the AfD is still doing better and better, right? And then, of course, the thing that you know, it's noteworthy that one of the current AfD's co-leaders, Alice Weidel, whom we see here to the right, is a lesbian. She and her Sri Lankan-born Swiss partner, Zara Bossert, have two adopted children. And we see this in other populist parties as well. So Pim Fortuyn, here to the left, who in many ways was the cultural and political predecessor to the current most influential Dutch populist Geert Wilders, whose party is currently in government, the Partij voor de Vrijheid, Party for Freedom. So Geert Wilders' political and cultural predecessor, Pim Fortuyn, there to the left, was a flamboyant, well-known homosexual. I think I might have time for one joke. So one politician once accused Pim Fortuyn, saying, what have you got against all these what have you got against Moroccan boys? To which Pim Fortuyn famously said, I've got nothing against Moroccan boys. I sleep with Moroccan boys. Anyway, so this was well known that he was gay, and yet he was enormously successful, Pim Fortuyn, until he was murdered in 2002. Then Florian Philippot, who between 2012 and 2017 was the right-hand man of Marine Le Pen, the leader of what's now called the Rassemblement National, the National Rally. Florian Philippot, likewise gay, Alice Weidel, gay as well. So this is sometimes called homo-nationalism, an ideology based on the assumption that it is particularly gay people who should be worried about an influx of Muslims into Western countries. But even Trump has his gay supporters as an official organization called Gays for Trump. And the Republican National Convention, there were various people making a speech there, starting off saying, I'm gay, and then, but I support Donald Trump, and I support Donald Trump. So as I say, there's one demographic that is consistent across all populist parties worldwide. That's, first of all, this sense of voicelessness, but then I guess also, this will be a second one, then also that they're heavily male-dominated. So the increasing visibility and power of women in society and culture, including in mainstream films and television series, coupled with feminist critiques of centuries-old patriarchal norms and values, has arguably left many men and boys insecure about their identity. And there's a male anxiety that has been heightened, I think, by the discussion surrounding trans people. So as a result, we are witnessing the revival of traditional and often toxic forms of masculinity. There to the right, we see the influencer Andrew Tate, arrested in Romania on suspicion of rape and human trafficking, and now was on his way back to the United States, has already arrived there. There's some suggestion, I don't know whether this is true or not, that the Trump administration put a fair amount of pressure on Romania to release him and his brother Tristan. They're still supposed to return to Romania to stand trial. I think the chances of that happening are limited. So right-wing extremist, sexist influencer there as a kind of backlash to the Me Too movement and all the rest of it. We see maybe something similar amongst, when you look at something like the treadwife trend on social media, traditional women, traditional wives, and populist parties play to this neo-paleo sensitivity as exemplified by a 2024 campaign ad by Donald Trump. If one abstracts from morality, which of course one can't, but if one did, this is actually a really brilliant campaign advert. I quote, Kamala Harris, Kamala is for they stroke them, Trump is for you. Okay, now 5 minutes, what's the time?
5 minutes.
Yeah, 5 minutes for the most interesting part of the lecture, because this is the most interesting part of the original part. So here's Mr. Musk. I can scrap all this. Right. So we tend to think of populism as being reliant on feelings of negativity, resentment, implicit bias, and explicit prejudice, and on a naive belief in the redemptive power of the party, its ideology, and its leader. And such a cast of mind, it is further assumed, is induced by disinformation and propaganda. And to the extent that the populist mindset is authentic, it is assumed it has a de-individualizing effect. It removes the individual's followers' agency and autonomy. Now, I'm not saying that that's completely wrong, but I do think it is one-sided. It overlooks one of the key features of populism. Populism is an empowerment of the individual. And it is so in 3 senses. One, the mass rally, but populism generally, is also the individual writ large. Each of these people, populist voters, people who go to a mass rally, each of them feels that now he or she matters, that now they have power, that now they can achieve things, that now finally they count. I'm being taken seriously again. I, my wife, my husband, my children. I do not disappear into the collective. I become me, a person with dignity. Maybe at some point Henrike will invite me back to talk about this for an hour. Okay, so that's number one. I'll just go very quickly. Hitler already wrote about that thing in Mein Kampf, by the way. I quote that in my book as well. Okay. So we can see this dynamic at play even on what looks like a purely consumerist level. So the best example of this are Donald Trump's rallies, but the same applies to radio and television shows and internet-based broadcasts by shock jocks and extremist podcasters and influencers. Such shows offer not simply, and perhaps not even primarily, a political message, but a form of entertainment. However, as Hegel, philosopher Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel there, 1770, 1831, as Hegel already said 200 years ago, consumerism is also a vehicle for self-expression and indeed self-realization. So even as entertainment, populism empowers me in my cultural preferences, me in my social relations, me in my identity. It's even more the case in America, where you see these massive cultural differences in terms of what people watch on television, for example, satirical shows like The Daily Show on the one hand, and sort of stuff on Fox News on the other hand. And this is why the appearance of Hulk Hogan at the Trump rally, the former WrestleMania wrestler Hulk Hogan there, this is why the appearance of Hulk Hogan at the Trump rally is not just a bit of fun, but an event with real psychological potency. And then finally, far from being solely a matter of negativity, of targeted hatreds, although it is that too, populism also engages people's positive emotions, their hopes and dreams. Ernst Bloch and the German philosopher Ernst Bloch, Jewish-German philosopher Ernst Bloch, 1885-1977, and historian Götz Ali, still alive today, have written about this in relation to National Socialism. Engaging people's hopes and emotions, the Nazis and the AfD, and again, of course, they're not the same, right? The National Socialism and populism, the yearnings they play to are not artificially created by the party, and nor are they simply those of atomized individuals seeking wholeness and belonging in the collective. They are highly personal aspirations, the wish for this or that house, for this or that job, the wish for this or that healthcare plan. So what populism, it's my final sentence, what populism, however fraudulently, offers its electorate is not simply a dream, a pre-given dream, but the power to dream. And that's one of the reasons that populism is so dangerous. Thank you for your attention.
Perfectly timed. Many thanks. A lot to discuss. I know that Howard Jones is already waiting in the wings for Old High German, a proper linguistics. We'll meet next week to talk together actually on another paper 4 topic. Those who would like to continue discussing with Henk de Berg or start properly discussing, very welcome to join us for a cup of tea across the road and continue the conversation. Many thanks.